Hello, survivors. My name is Dr. George Byrne. I don't know how many of you are still out there, how many radios still work, or how many people still believe there's anything left to hear. But if you're picking this up, if you're alive, hiding, or barely holding on, then I'm here, and I'll keep speaking until I used to be a field doctor, just a man in a white coat, patching up broken limbs and broken spirits in refugee zones. I never thought I'd be the voice on the air after the world ended. But that's what happened, didn't it? The end didn't come with fire or floods or bombs. It came with teeth and blood and silence. The outbreak was slow at first, isolated, contained, we thought, a cluster in the Balkans, a mysterious illness in Belarus, a strange series of disappearances in southern France. The stories didn't make headlines for long. People vanish all the time. A few drained corpses don't turn the wheels of global news. We were too late to recognize what was happening. The first time I saw one, it wasn't in a lab or a battlefield. It was in a hospital corridor lit by backup generators. The patient had flatlined 20 minutes earlier. I was documenting his death. When his eyes opened, they were the wrong color. When he moved, it wasn't movement, it was something else. Like muscle memory running on pure hunger, he attacked 2 nurses before I could react. I tried CPR, I tried reason, I tried screaming. None of it worked. They're not dead, they're not alive, they're not like the things from horror films. Not exactly. These vampires don't wear cloaks or speak in riddles. They don't glamour you or turn into bats. They run, they hunt, they smell blood like sharks smell salt water. And they're evolving, smarter, faster, more coordinated, but I'll talk more about that later. Right now, all you need to know is this. If you're still breathing, you are part of the resistance, even if all you've done today is survive. This broadcast isn't entertainment. It's not fiction. It's not hope for sale. It's lifeline and ledger. We log the truth here, the kind that keeps you alive. Every transmission I send includes updates from survivor networks, behavioral patterns from field observers, regions to avoid, tips that might give you 1 more hour, 1 more day. I'll also share what we're calling the bright stories. People who fought back, communities that have held the line, children who sang in the dark. Because sometimes remembering who we are is the best way to remember why we keep fighting. You may be alone. You may be injured. You may be tired of moving at night, sleeping in attics, rationing your last protein bar like it's a feast. But as long as your heart still beats, you are not forgotten. And if you're listening, I promise someone out here is still fighting with you. Every time I speak into this mic, I picture someone, maybe a teenager in the ruins of a school, maybe an old woman alone with a wind-up radio, maybe a group of survivors in a flooded subway tunnel, clinging to what's left. I picture them hearing my voice and remembering they aren't crazy. This is happening, and they aren't alone. For those new to this frequency, this is Station Aegis. I named it after the shield of old myth because right now, the truth is our shield. I transmit twice daily. Sunrise and sunset, local time, irrelevant now that time itself is broken. You'll know it's me because the broadcast always begins with this phrase. You're listening to the radio. I won't use codes or encryption. The vampires don't listen to the radio. Not yet. And if they ever do, it means they've grown far beyond what we're ready for. But for now, this is our open channel. Our thin thread of communication stitched through the noise of a world fallen to shadow. If you've survived this long, you know that the old world is gone. But I don't believe it's lost. The cities may have fallen, governments collapsed, digital systems burned, but humanity, our kindness, our grit, our stubborn love, those things haven't died. I've seen them, even now, especially now. You'll hear reports from survivors around the globe. I'll share what we know about the enemy, what works, what doesn't, what might. I'll walk you through survival strategies, from how to identify a feeding trail to what kind of shelter blocks pheromone trails. We're learning too. Every day we get smarter, more precise, less afraid. But this isn't just about survival. It's about memory, about meaning, about giving the dead their names, even if they never had a proper grave. About keeping the fire lit no matter how cold it gets out there. You didn't choose this world, but you're in it. And if you're listening, that means there's still a sliver of connection between us. Between you and me. Between the broken cities and the last strongholds. Between grief and whatever comes next. Hold on to that. This is Dr. George Byrne broadcasting from what's left of Station Aegis. I'll be here until I can't be. Let's begin. Let's talk about the world we lost and the one we're surviving in now. The Vampire Outbreak didn't begin with blood. It began with silence. The kind that spreads beneath headlines, beneath borders, beneath the fabric of what we called civilization. The kind of silence that doesn't scream or warn. It waits. And when it finally spoke, it was already too late. In the early months, the world mistook the outbreak for everything it wasn't. Hemorrhagic fever, parasitic infection, designer drug-induced psychosis. We labeled it, quarantined it, televised it, and then we moved on, because the truth didn't fit inside the frameworks we trusted. There were early field reports out of Eastern Europe describing victims who wouldn't die even after cardiac arrest. Patients who exhibited extreme strength and organ shutdown simultaneously, but the reports were buried beneath bureaucracy and fear, because even the idea, just the idea of what this might be, it was too big, too terrifying, too ancient. By the time the first cities fell, the world still hadn't called it what it was. They called it blood plague, rage flu, 19, anything but what it really was. An extinction-level predator, hiding behind the mask of myth. The fall of Paris was the turning point. That was the first time the media stopped calling it an illness. It wasn't just that people were dying. It was that they were coming back, but not as themselves. Emergency broadcasts showed footage of a horde scaling the walls of Montmartre like insects, moving as if they shared a signal. The faces were human. The behavior wasn't. Civilians were evacuated by the tens of thousands, but the infection had already moved through the sewer systems, the ventilation grids. Paris was gone in 3 days. Then came Sao Paulo, Johannesburg, Manila, Melbourne. The infection didn't follow geography. It followed blood traffic, organ smuggling routes, transfusion supply lines, mobile refugee networks. It didn't care about borders. It cared about access. Once a city reached 10% infected, it was over. Full collapse followed within 72 hours. Every time, governments responded the way we always do when we don't understand something. They deployed force, curfews, kill zones. They tried to bomb their way back to control. But you can't drone something that doesn't feel fear. You can't gas something that doesn't breathe. You can't intimidate an enemy that's already dead, or worse, never truly was. Some nations attempted containment strategies. The Scandinavian lockdown, the North African sun net, the Alaskan burn protocols, all failed. Not because the science was wrong, but because the time for containment had already passed. The vampires weren't just predators. They were vectors. Every bite created more. Every body became a weapon, and every failed attempt at suppression only fed the panic. When New York fell, The global financial system collapsed in under 48 hours. When Tokyo followed, global communications began to fragment. And when Berlin went dark, the world stopped pretending there was a world left to save. What's left now are fragments. Isolated clusters of human resistance. Some are military remnants. Some are civilian enclaves built inside mountains, mines, offshore oil rigs. Some survive not by strength, but by silence, by staying small, invisible, hidden between the cracks of the new empire rising. Because make no mistake, it is an empire. The infected don't just roam, they organize, they adapt. There are signs of structure, hierarchy even. We've seen gatherings, coordinated strikes, zones of avoidance, as if certain areas are claimed. Some survivors report seeing the same faces again and again in different regions, as if some of the infected are thinking, planning. There's a theory circulating in what's left of the scientific community that this isn't just infection, that there's a form of intelligence governing them. Maybe not centralized, maybe not even fully conscious, but something, a guiding force, an instinct at the very least. Others believe it's hive-like, perhaps evolved out of something microbial, parasitic, viral. But then there are accounts that suggest something else entirely, something older. I don't know which to believe. I only know what I've seen. I've watched them hesitate before crossing thresholds. I've watched them stop and look at the sun as if remembering something. I've seen the same vampire return to the same place night after night, as if haunted by what it once was. And I've seen them kill without sound, without hesitation, without humanity. There are no safe continents, no untouched zones. Every region of the globe has fallen into one of three categories: silent, struggling, or swarming. The silent zones are places where all communication has ceased. No signals, no lights, no confirmed survivors. We don't know if these zones are empty or completely overrun. Siberia, Central Australia, most of sub-Saharan Africa, the Greenland coast. These are the blank spaces on the map now. The struggling zones are where survivors still fight, still broadcast, still scavenge what's left of the old world. Places like parts of northern Canada, scattered mountain towns in Colombia, underground train networks in the UK, and the flooded ruins of Amsterdam. These are the zones where resistance lives scarred, fragmented, but alive. The swarming zones are cities and regions fully dominated by the infected, where no human has survived long enough to send a second message. These are the crimson blackouts on the map. Los Angeles, Bangkok, Lagos, Istanbul, all swallowed, all ruled now by the night. Infrastructure is gone. Power grids are shattered. Water purification is a memory. The satellites we once depended on now drift in blind loops, transmitting static or silence. A few rogue engineers, bless them, have kept shortwave radio alive. Some independent systems powered by solar or hydro still sputter forward. But we are no longer a connected species. We are a species in retreat. And yet, despite everything, I speak to you now. And that means you're still listening. Somewhere in the dark, you're hearing my voice, which means we haven't lost. Not yet. I want to be clear. This broadcast isn't about cataloging defeat. It's about understanding the terrain of what's left. Because you can't survive a world you don't understand. And we've spent too long pretending this was just a bad flu. A strange phase, a temporary storm. This isn't a storm. This is the new weather, the new night. But it's not without pattern. Not without weakness, and certainly not without resistance. In the next part of this segment, I'll tell you about how the resistance began and what remains of it. I'll share how the world adapted, where the lines were drawn, and why some places survived longer than others. I'll walk you through what's been observed across different latitudes, how the infected interact with their environment, and the small but powerful lessons we've learned through loss. This is Dr. George Byrne, and you're still listening to the radio. As I spoke earlier, we now find ourselves scattered across a world reshaped by the vampire outbreak. The structure we once called civilization is a memory. The familiar systems of life, governments, commerce, and social order are no longer in place. Instead, humanity's survival hinges on a much smaller scale. Individuals, small communities, and, if we're fortunate, regional resistance efforts. The truth is, there's no easy way to pinpoint when the tipping point occurred. We've all tried to mark the moments of our collapse, each person or group grasping for some thread of a timeline they can cling to. But the reality is that the vampire outbreak didn't simply disrupt the world. It broke it, shattered it, piece by piece. Look at the coastal cities, once bustling hubs of commerce and culture. Now they are graveyards. Los Angeles, once a symbol of modernity and excess, is now a shadowed ruin, inhabited only by the infected. They roam the streets in droves, using the structures we built for our own convenience as traps to lure the unwary. The same streets that were once a symbol of progress have become the highways of terror, darkened by bloodlust and the insidious intelligence of their new rule of dawn. Even the once sacred space of the Hollywood Hills, where the stars once stood in shining glory, now echoes with the sound of nightmarish shrieks. It's not just cities either. Rural communities with their isolation and perceived safety have not been spared. Many of them, in fact, were hit harder, as they relied on older methods of communication and were slower to respond to the rising tide of infection. These communities were often smaller, with less access to resources and no real infrastructure to fall back on. When the outbreak began to spread across rural regions, it was like a wildfire, quickly consuming the outposts of humanity and leaving nothing but empty husks. They were silent zones before long, swallowed by the infection without even a warning. But the small pockets of survivors that remain, scattered across the world, they keep on. You can hear their voices if you listen closely enough. Not the faint echo of a world we once knew, but the defiant murmurs of those still fighting, still standing in the face of extinction. One of the most striking phenomena we've observed is the way the vampires organize. At first, we believe them to be mindless predators, driven only by an insatiable hunger for blood. But as time has passed, it's become increasingly clear that there's more at play. Some survivors have reported witnessing vampires behaving with a disturbing degree of coordination, almost as if they were being controlled by a higher intelligence, a force behind the outbreak that we still don't fully understand. We're beginning to piece together theories. Perhaps the vampires are evolving in ways we don't yet comprehend. Some survivors claim to have seen them develop new tactics, ones that are too intricate for simple predation. These aren't mindless creatures driven by primal instincts. They're becoming more strategic, more methodical. They don't just hunt for food. They hunt for something else. Something we can't fully grasp yet. And it's not just about survival. There are whispers of vampires who seem to be protecting certain areas, holding ground like soldiers. We've heard rumors of leader vampires, beings of higher intelligence who control the hordes. Whether this is the result of a mutation or a deliberate adaptation to their environment, we can't say for sure. What we do know is that these creatures are no longer simply dangerous. They are organized. They are territorial. Some of the areas they've claimed, places we once called our homes, are now centers of their dominion. Entire cities have been renamed. The infected have turned our places of power into their own, turning buildings and streets into fortresses. They've learned how to live off the land, adapting to the changing environment, to the lack of resources, to the absence of the world we once built. And they've learned how to fight, not just by biting, but by using our own weapons against us. We know that the vampire outbreak didn't happen overnight. It didn't just erupt like some primal storm. It was gradual, creeping into every part of the world without warning. It began in the darkest corners of the world, in remote areas that were already struggling with the after effects of poverty, disease, and social collapse. The virus, or whatever it is that caused this, didn't care about borders, class, or civilization. It spread with terrifying efficiency, like wildfire on a windblown night. It spread, and it spread fast. The first signs were subtle. It wasn't the sudden appearance of vampires on every street corner. It was much slower. A sudden increase in disappearances. People gone without a trace. No bodies, no evidence, just the absence of life. And then came the strange behavior. People who couldn't be killed by conventional means. People who seemed to return to life, their eyes glowing with a hunger that no human could possess. It was only when entire communities began to fall silent, entire populations wiped out in a matter of days, that the world started to wake up to the truth. But by then, it was too late. The question of how the outbreak spread is one that haunts survivors more than anything else. Was it biological warfare? A hidden viral agent? A natural mutation of an existing disease? No one knows. All we have are theories, but none of them offer any comfort. The fact remains that the world was blindsided by an enemy that was too advanced for us to fight off. It wasn't just the creatures themselves, it was the strategy behind them, the ability to adapt, to change, to work together as a collective. It's the adaptation that's the most disturbing part. If these creatures were simply mindless killers, we could perhaps handle them, but they're not. They're evolving. They learn, and with each passing day, it feels like they're getting better at hunting us down. There's a growing suspicion that the outbreak wasn't a natural occurrence at all, but the result of some sort of external intervention. There are whispers of corporate experimentation, of a bioengineered virus released into the world by an entity that may no longer even exist. Some believe that the vampire outbreak was never meant to kill humans. It was meant to convert us, to turn us into something else entirely. A new race of beings who are stronger, faster, and more adaptable than we ever were. The resistance against the vampire hordes is not uniform. Some groups focus on direct combat, others on survival through stealth and strategy. There are those who think the key to winning this fight is to break the infected's hold over human minds. Then, there are those who believe the only way to stop this is to eliminate the vampire leaders themselves, if such leaders exist. But these groups are often divided, their resources scattered, and their methods disparate. As much as humanity has always been good at fighting against the odds, this time we're fighting against something we don't fully understand. In the absence of coordination, some have turned to old-world solutions, fortified safe zones. These zones, though small and few in number, offer the most tangible hope for survivors. They are places where a semblance of normal life has been kept intact. Small communities working together to rebuild, to regrow, to survive. But even these safe havens are tenuous at best. With the vampires growing smarter and more resourceful, the safety of these zones is constantly under threat. Every day is a new challenge. If there is one thing the survivors have learned from this disaster, it's this. We cannot afford to lose hope. Not yet. The infected may rule the cities, but they don't rule the land. There are still pockets of humanity, still places where life can flourish, still places where we can fight back. And so, as I speak to you now, I am reminded of one simple truth. We are not the end. We are not the last. We are still here. And as long as we still breathe, as long as we still stand, we still have a chance. This is Dr. George Byrne, broadcasting from Station Aegis. You're listening to the radio, and you are not alone. As we continue our broadcast, I'll be sharing updates from various survivors across the globe. The landscape of the world is forever changed, but in the midst of this ongoing catastrophe, humanity has shown remarkable adaptability. The story of our survival, of holding on to hope and finding purpose, is written in the stories of survivors fighting against overwhelming odds. These accounts from across the world may offer insight into how we can hold on to what little remains. In this section, we will focus on survivors from several key locations, regions where the battle between humanity and the vampire outbreak has taken on different forms. From the remains of once great cities to hidden sanctuaries built underground, these are the stories of those who are still resisting, fighting, and surviving. We begin on the east coast of the United States, where the survivors in New York City have established what they call the last light. This city, once teeming with life, is now a fractured urban landscape. The city's iconic skyline, once a beacon of human ambition, has become a battleground, with high-rise buildings serving as both fortresses and hiding places for the few remaining survivors. In the last light, survival is a constant struggle. They've managed to hold on to the power grid by utilizing the remnants of the city's infrastructure, relying on solar panels, wind turbines, and a skeleton crew of engineers to maintain basic power supplies. The survivors here know the power grid is the last thread holding their fragile existence together. Without it, they would be plunged into darkness, vulnerable to the blood-hungry vampires that roam the streets at night. The group here has developed an intricate system of barricades and traps, using the city's decaying infrastructure to keep vampires at bay. The skyscrapers that once symbolized progress now serve as their fortresses. The survivors' most effective defense has been their high ground advantage. By occupying the upper floors of these buildings, they've been able to monitor movements and defend their positions from above. But even so, they're not safe. The vampires have shown a growing intelligence, able to track survivors and learn from their patterns. On several occasions, they've managed to breach the lower levels of buildings and bypass security measures. The survivors are becoming increasingly resourceful, learning how to build makeshift weapons and craft new defenses, but food and medicine are scarce. They're relying on stored provisions, scavenging whatever remains from abandoned buildings, and hunting any animals they can find in the city's remnants. These survivors have become both hunters and engineers, adapting to an unforgiving world. In recent weeks, a chilling development has surfaced. A new faction of vampires, rumored to have more intelligence and strategic planning, has appeared on the outskirts of the city. These vampires don't just attack blindly. They coordinate their assaults, work in groups, and seem to be more resistant to typical human tactics. The survivors in the last light know that time is running out. They've sent out scouts to find other survivor enclaves, hoping that reinforcements and new tactics can help bolster their defenses. The sense of isolation is palpable here. The survivors long for any sign of human connection. They send out radio signals hoping for any response, but each day brings only silence. The people of the last light cling to the hope that they aren't alone in this world, that somewhere, someone is listening. But the vampire threat is closing in, and with every passing hour, their chances of survival diminish. Across the Atlantic, in Paris, the situation is even more dire. The once proud city of lights now lies in ruin, its streets overrun by vampire hordes. But in the deep, forgotten corners of the city, a small band of survivors has found refuge in the catacombs. These ancient burial tunnels, once home to millions of the dead, now shelter a living resistance. The survivors here know that daylight is their ally. The vampires may be able to rule the world above, but they are powerless in the darkness of these underground labyrinths. The catacombs have become a sanctuary for these brave souls. They've set up a self-sustaining system beneath the city, relying on water filtration systems, hydroponics, and other forms of underground farming to keep themselves fed. But even this place, so removed from the vampire chaos, is under constant threat. The vampires, now highly organized and evolving rapidly, have begun to adapt to this new underground warfare. Some of them have learned to navigate the catacombs, detecting human presence by scent or sound, making it more difficult for the survivors to remain hidden. In response, the survivors here have formed a tight-knit guerrilla army composed of former soldiers, civilians, and anyone willing to fight back. Their tactics are swift and brutal. They strike quickly, sabotage vampire camps, and retreat back into the maze of tunnels before the vampires can retaliate. But the struggle is relentless. The vampires aren't just mindless predators, they're learning, adapting, and evolving. They now seem to be using advanced tactics, setting traps for the survivors, luring them into ambushes, and coordinating their attacks. The resistance in Paris is on the defensive, constantly moving, constantly shifting, always one step ahead of the vampire. Despite the overwhelming odds, the survivors hold on to a glimmer of hope. They've discovered old texts and artifacts hidden beneath the city, ancient books, lore, and relics that speak of weaknesses in vampires. They believe that if they can decode this knowledge, they may find a way to strike at the heart of the vampire threat. The hope of reclaiming Paris, however distant it may seem, fuels their determination. But Paris is not the only city in Europe to fall. Many other cities, including London and Berlin, have suffered similar fates, with the survivors now living in constant fear of the vampires' evolving tactics. Some have even reported sightings of vampires working in organized units, almost like military factions, taking over entire countries with terror. In Africa, the vampire outbreak has taken a different shape. In the southern part of the continent, Johannesburg has become a stronghold for a group of survivors who have learned to adapt to the unique challenges of their environment. The survivors here have turned vast stretches of farmland into defensive fortresses. With the use of metal fencing, trenches, and heavy barricades, they've created a perimeter that keeps the vampires at bay. This isn't an easy task. These survivors face frequent attacks, but they've managed to hold their ground. The survivors in Johannesburg have turned to agriculture as a means of survival. They've set up underground hydroponic systems, using the soil to grow food that can sustain them in these trying times. But these systems are not infallible. The city's outskirts remain a constant danger, with roving bands of vampires stalking the survivors. There are reports that the vampires in this region have become more cunning, using stealth and ambush tactics to capture or kill those who venture too far from their stronghold. In Nairobi, another group of survivors has also found a way to fight back. They've begun building rudimentary ultraviolet light weapons, which they use to defend their territories. But Nairobi, unlike Johannesburg, faces a much more terrifying problem. Vampire factions that are growing rapidly and seem to have developed a level of intelligence beyond anything the survivors have encountered before. These vampires are reportedly able to track survivors through scent and sound, making it nearly impossible to hide from them. In Nairobi, small resistance groups have formed, operating in cells. They've begun gathering in secret, planning their next moves with a sense of urgency. The survivors know that if they don't act soon, they'll lose their last stronghold against the vampire onslaught. In Asia, the vampire outbreak has taken on an even more unsettling form. Tokyo, once the pinnacle of technology and innovation, now lies under the rule of vampire factions that have evolved far beyond the traditional mindless predators. These vampires have begun to coordinate with one another, operating like a hive mind. They can anticipate human movements, trap survivors, and even launch strategic attacks. For those who have survived, Tokyo has become a living nightmare, a city of traps, intelligence, and overwhelming vampire forces. But even here, hope is not lost. Survivors have banded together, creating underground sanctuaries where they rely on highly advanced technology to protect themselves. They've created systems of ultraviolet lights and have begun experimenting with solar-powered weapons capable of repelling the vampires. But these solutions, while effective, are still in their infancy, and it's unclear whether they can turn the tide in the long run. The story of survival, of resistance, is being written in the survivors of these regions. Though each day brings new challenges, new horrors, and growing despair, the will to resist burns brightly. They have lost so much, but they continue to fight. As we hear these updates from the front lines, we are reminded of the one truth that remains undeniable. Humanity will always find a way to survive. It may not always be easy, and it may not always be pretty, but it will always be worth the fight. In South America, the vampire outbreak has created a distinctly different battleground, with survivors taking refuge in the jungles and urban areas that have become increasingly dangerous. Buenos Aires, once a thriving cultural center, has been overrun by vampires. However, unlike other cities, the survivors here have managed to carve out small communities within the jungles surrounding the city. These survivors, who call themselves the Last Leaf, have adapted to their environment by becoming guerrilla fighters, experts in navigating the dense foliage and exploiting the terrain. The survivors here are not only focused on defending their homes, but also on maintaining a strong connection with the land. They've learned to grow food in small plots hidden deep in the jungle, relying on the plants and resources around them to stay nourished. At night, they use the cover of darkness to move about, avoiding the vampire patrols that search for them. The vampires, while intelligent, seem to struggle in the dense jungle. They've had limited success in infiltrating the survivors' camps, but it's only a matter of time before they learn how to adapt to the jungle's challenges. What sets these survivors apart is their unique ability to create makeshift weapons from natural resources. They've developed traps, spears, and even natural poisons derived from plants in the area. They are not only fighting the vampires, but also trying to preserve the natural world, believing that if humanity is to survive, it must learn to coexist with nature again. The Last Leaf has also established a communication system using old radio equipment, allowing them to send and receive messages from other survivor enclaves. Still, the constant threat from the vampires is never far. The vampires have been known to launch organized raids on survivor camps, and the survivors have had to retreat deeper into the jungle on more than one occasion. Despite these setbacks, they continue to fight on, holding on to the belief that survival isn't just about staying alive, but also about keeping the spirit of humanity intact. In the dense jungles surrounding Buenos Aires, the survivors are faced with the challenge of both the vampires and the unforgiving environment, tropical diseases, dangerous wildlife, and the constant pressure of vampire attacks make each day a battle for survival. Yet, the resilience of the human spirit in these survivors shines through as they refuse to give up, even when the odds seem insurmountable. In Cairo, the situation is grim. The desert city has become a fortress in its own right, with the last remaining survivors holding on in the ancient pyramids and beneath the shadow of the Sphinx. The surrounding desert, while a natural barrier, has also become a dangerous place, as vampire patrols sweep the vast stretches of sand in search of any survivors they can find. The survivors in Cairo have turned the desert to their advantage. They've constructed a series of fortifications using the ruins of ancient structures, including the pyramids and temples that dot the landscape. These survivors, many of whom were once archaeologists, historians, and desert dwellers, have used their knowledge of the land to create a network of secret passages, hidden chambers, and defensive positions. They are experts in desert survival, able to withstand the harsh climate and the vampires who prowl the streets at night. But even in this ancient city, the vampires have proven to be formidable adversaries. They seem to have adapted to the desert, moving quickly through the night to avoid the sun. They have begun to use the cover of sandstorms to launch surprise attacks, catching survivors off guard and overrunning their defenses. The survivors, while skilled and resourceful, are finding it increasingly difficult to defend against such a relentless enemy. Despite this, the survivors in Cairo have managed to hold out, banding together in an effort to protect the sacred sites of their ancestors. They see the pyramids as symbols of human perseverance, and refuse to let them fall into the hands of the vampires. They've turned these monuments into bastions of hope, using the catacombs beneath the city as hideouts and rallying points for their growing resistance. The survivors in Cairo know that the fight is far from over. The vampires are learning new tactics, and they must evolve in turn if they are to survive. But in the desert's heat, where the sun never fully sets, the survivors remain determined to hold their ground. Finally, we turn to the Pacific Islands, a region that, for a brief moment, seemed to be a safe haven from the vampire outbreak. However, in recent months, reports have begun to surface of vampires being found on the islands, likely brought by infected survivors or cargo ships that were unable to escape the vampire infestation. In the remote island of Fiji, survivors have turned to the ocean for both food and defense. They've built fortified islands, using natural coral reefs and underwater caves as both hiding places and natural defenses against the vampires. The survivors here are living in small, tight-knit communities, relying on fishing, farming, and basic renewable energy to power their homes. But the threat is ever present. The vampires, though unable to fully adapt to the sea, have developed a form of aquatic mobility, using the island's shorelines and reefs as access points. At night, the survivors hear eerie sounds of what they've come to call the water vampires, creatures that hunt not only by land, but by sea as well. These vampires, still largely restricted to coastal areas, have become increasingly deadly as they use the water to conceal their movements and launch surprise attacks on the survivors. The survivors on the islands are not waiting idly for the vampires to come to them. They've built a network of small boats, rafts, and makeshift submarines to explore other islands, trade with distant survivors, and search for any remaining refuge. They've even begun to experiment with ultraviolet light systems powered by solar energy to keep the vampires at bay during the night. However, these systems are still rudimentary and unreliable, and the vampires are becoming more adept at circumventing them. In this isolated part of the world, survival is a daily struggle. The survivors must constantly adapt to the changing tides of the vampire outbreak, never knowing when or where the next threat will arise. But, as in every other region, hope remains. They continue to fight for their survival, pushing forward with the belief that one day they will reclaim the Pacific Islands from the vampire scourge. As we've seen in these regional updates, the vampire outbreak has brought different challenges to each part of the world. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity has refused to surrender. From the skyscrapers of New York to the jungles of Buenos Aires, from the ancient pyramids of Cairo to the isolated islands of the Pacific, survivors continue to resist. They adapt, they fight, they survive. In these moments of darkness, it's important to remember that the light of hope still burns brightly in the hearts of those who continue to hold on. The world is not lost yet. The survivors around the globe are united in their struggle, each one contributing to the larger fight for humanity's future. The vampires may be evolving, learning and adapting, but so too are we. The world is a much smaller place now, but in the face of this unimaginable nightmare, humanity's resilience remains our strongest weapon. We will not be defeated. We will rise. The fight is far from over. As humanity evolves in the face of the vampire plague, so too do the vampires. What began as a simple bloodthirsty, nocturnal predator has transformed into a far more complex and terrifying enemy. Vampires have always been fast and deadly, but the ones that emerged from the first waves of the outbreak have begun to adapt in alarming new ways. Initially, their strengths were clear: incredible speed, superior strength, and an insatiable hunger for human blood. These traits allowed them to decimate cities quickly, taking advantage of their prey's vulnerability. But over time, something unexpected happened. The vampires began to evolve, developing more sophisticated strategies, physical adaptations, and even group dynamics that rendered them much more formidable. One of the first major evolutionary shifts was the development of heightened intelligence. Early on, vampires were single-minded hunters, focused solely on hunting and feeding. Now they have become tacticians, often working in coordinated groups. They have developed an almost military sense of strategy, working together to outsmart and overpower even the most well-fortified human strongholds. These vampires, often referred to as the alpha strain, seem to display an unnerving level of problem-solving and social interaction. They can organize their attacks, find weaknesses and defenses, and adapt to human traps. They are also learning how to manipulate their environment to their advantage. Some groups have been seen using the remains of abandoned cities or dense forests as launch points for ambushes, setting traps for survivors with alarming precision. On a biological level, the vampires' physical traits have grown even more dangerous. Their speed and strength remain unmatched, but they've begun to exhibit new behaviors that suggest an enhanced sense of survival. Their eyes have become more attuned to changes in their environment, allowing them to detect motion from great distances. Vampires that once were bound to the night now show an increasing ability to move in twilight, adjusting to the reduced light conditions found in early evening or near dawn. Their ability to hunt in near total darkness has only become more refined, making them nearly impossible to evade in the early hours. Some survivors have reported that vampires now seem to communicate with each other in ways they never did before. These creatures appear to have a form of telepathic or coordinated signaling, using sound, gesture, or even pheromones to communicate over distances. Whether this is a result of the virus or something more unsettling remains unclear. But these vampires have developed a collective intelligence that makes them even harder to fight against. Perhaps the most chilling adaptation, however, has been their growing resistance to sunlight. Traditional weaknesses, like sensitivity to sunlight, have always been a hallmark of vampires in myth and folklore. However, with each passing month, it seems that this weakness is waning. Vampires exposed to sunlight for short periods now appear to suffer less from the debilitating effects they once did. Their skin has grown tougher, almost leathery, enabling them to withstand longer exposure to daylight without the same debilitating reaction they once had. While they are still more vulnerable during the day, it's clear that they are adapting rapidly, and no longer is the sun the refuge it once was. Additionally, the vampire's ability to feed has shifted. They now seem to possess a greater metabolic efficiency, feeding more rapidly and often in less time. Survivors have observed vampires taking smaller, more strategic bites rather than draining their prey entirely, allowing them to sustain themselves over longer periods. This has led to more subtle attacks, where a single vampire can silently feed off multiple people without attracting immediate attention. Humanized vampires are not invulnerable, though. Their weaknesses remain. The traditional vulnerability to silver, wooden stakes, and decapitation still hold true in most cases. But the evolution of the vampire's tactics and their physical endurance has made these methods of defense harder to implement effectively. Survivors who are well prepared with these weapons may be able to fend them off, But these attacks often require precision and speed that few humans can muster in the face of such intelligent and organized enemies. One new weakness that has emerged, however, lies in the form of blood clotting. As the vampire infection has evolved, its biological processes have become more complex. In certain cases, vampires that have fed too much without replenishing their own blood supply have exhibited signs of fatigue and weakness. Some survivors have discovered that vampires that are overly bloated or have fed too frequently can move slower and are easier to incapacitate. However, this vulnerability is rare and not easily exploited, as the vampires seem to have learned to moderate their feeding patterns. The adaptation of airborne pheromones used by some vampires to communicate with one another has also created a potential new weakness for the survivors. It has been reported that specialized filtering systems, like those used by certain survivor enclaves in closed spaces, can protect individuals from the pheromone signals. These systems, often installed in shelters, have allowed humans to evade the most strategic vampire attacks. While this approach has not been widely adopted, it could become a key component of future resistance efforts. Finally, another emerging form of defense among survivors is the use of specially designed UV weapons, which have proven to be effective against certain strains of vampire. UV guns, created by makeshift scientists in resistance enclaves, work by firing intense UV rays in concentrated bursts, forcing vampires to retreat or be burned by the light. These weapons have become coveted and are often used by resistance fighters to create safe zones and eliminate vampire threat. However, UV light has its limitations, and sustained exposure still only weakens the vampire, rather than killing it outright. One of the most terrifying aspects of this evolving enemy is how they interact with humans. Vampires, once driven solely by bloodlust, have now begun to view humans not just as prey, but as a resource. Some vampires have been observed keeping survivors alive in captivity, feeding off them intermittently in an effort to prolong their existence. These captives are sometimes used as breeding stock for new vampires, or even as test subjects to better understand the virus's effects. The relationship between vampires and humans has shifted dramatically. In some places, human survivors have been captured, controlled, and used as tools for the vampire's own goals, effectively becoming slaves to their new masters. Other times, there are reports of humans being turned into vampires on purpose, usually to act as spies or infiltrators within human settlements. These individuals, transformed into the same monsters they once fought, are forced to carry out horrific missions under the vampire's orders. This terrifying new form of human-vampire interaction represents a complete shift from the early days of the outbreak, where vampires were seen as mere killers and predators. The vampires are now exhibiting behavior that mirrors the worst aspects of human conquest, manipulating the very survivors they once hunted. As we continue to face this ever-evolving threat, it's crucial to adapt to these new dangers, hone our tactics, and remember that the fight isn't over. Vampires may be evolving, but so too are we. Humanity's resilience has not been extinguished. It has only grown stronger. We must continue to learn, to adapt, and to fight. As the vampire threat grows ever more complex, survival requires not only courage, but also adaptability. The vampire's increasing intelligence, strength, and ability to evolve mean that human survivors must think beyond traditional survival methods and adjust to the ever-changing environment. In this section, we will discuss practical advice on how to outlast the vampire plague, relying on proven strategies, new techniques, and innovative thinking. In the early days of the outbreak, it was enough to lock doors and windows, but the vampires have quickly learned how to breach these basic defenses. As their intelligence grows, so does their ability to navigate human settlements. One of the most most crucial steps to surviving a vampire attack is ensuring that your shelter is secure. Start by reinforcing doors and windows with metal bars or wooden planks. Survivors have found that solid steel barriers are particularly effective against vampire strength. If you're in an urban environment, aim for multi-story buildings, ideally those that have been abandoned, as vampires tend to focus their efforts on ground-level hunting. High ground not only makes it harder for vampires to reach you, but also provides a clear view of the surrounding area, allowing you to spot threats before they get too close. If you're in a rural area, consider using camouflage shelters or hidden bunkers to avoid detection. Build shelters far from vampire-heavy zones and make sure your structure blends into the natural environment, making it difficult for vampires to track your movements. One of the most valuable pieces of information any survivor can gain is understanding the vampire's behavior. Despite their evolving intelligence, vampires are still creatures of habit. In many areas, their hunting routines are predictable. Vampires tend to attack at night, but not all of them are bound by the same rules. Some, particularly the more evolved strains, are active during twilight hours, when daylight is still present, but the world is not entirely lit. Pay attention to patterns of vampire activity around your area. Are they more active in certain regions or seasons? Do they avoid specific places? In some locations, vampires have developed a territorial nature, where they will focus their efforts on a particular area and stay within a designated perimeter. These areas can be avoided with careful observation and planning. While vampires may be learning how to better track humans, they still rely on sensory information like sound and smell. Silent movement is one of the most effective strategies to avoid detection. If you're moving between locations, be sure to keep noise to an absolute minimum and avoid walking through areas known to be frequently patrolled by vampires. The vulnerability to sunlight, while diminishing, is still a significant advantage for human survivors. Some vampires are now less sensitive to sunlight, but the early hours of the morning and late afternoon remain crucial windows of safety. You may not have the luxury of fully daytime hours, but it's still possible to capitalize on these moments. To maximize your chances of survival during daylight hours, set up safe zones during the brief periods when the sun is still visible. During this time, you can venture out for critical supply runs, fortifying your shelter further, or evacuating to more secure locations. While this may seem risky, it's often your best bet in securing resources for long-term survival. In addition to sunlight, UV-based weapons and devices have shown significant promise in combating vampire threats. Survivors who are fortunate enough to have access to UV lamps or torches can use them to repel or harm vampires. A powerful UV flashlight can cause vampires to recoil, even if they are not entirely incapacitated. UV rays can also be used to create defensive perimeters around shelters, discouraging vampires from approaching. Though vampires are vulnerable to traditional weapons such as wooden stakes, silver, and decapitation, surviving an encounter often requires more than just physical tools. There are a few important strategies to keep in mind when dealing with vampires in combat situations. First, always have your weapons ready, but don't become too dependent on them. In close-quarter combat, having a knife or a small, quick weapon is essential. Vampires can move at incredible speeds, and if you rely too much on heavier or slower weapons, you risk being caught off guard. Keep a small, sharp object like a silver knife on you at all times. Silver is particularly effective against most vampires, even those who have adapted to sunlight. Second, learn how to fight defensively. If you're caught by a vampire, your first priority is not to kill it, but to escape. Fending off a vampire is often impossible without the right tools and preparation. If possible, use traps and environmental advantages to disable or delay the vampire long enough to make your escape. Booby traps and barriers can be a powerful tool. Set up distractions and obstacles between you and the vampire to slow it down. While it may take extra time and energy to set up, these tactics have proven to be effective in deterring vampires from attacking. Use tripwires, thrown objects, or barricades to make your escape route safer. In the midst of the vampire outbreak, it's easy to overlook basic survival needs such as water, food, and hygiene. However, these are essential to maintaining your health and strength in a world where your survival depends on stamina and quick thinking. Water is the most vital resource for your survival. Clean water sources may be scarce, but wherever you are, try to secure access to fresh, uncontaminated water. Be cautious of local streams or rivers, as vampires may use them to move undetected. If possible, filter your water or purify it using fire or chemical purification tablets. Food is also essential. While vampires hunt and feed off humans, you should not expect to be able to scavenge from the same sources as the creatures you are fighting. Grow your own food if you can, or keep a stockpile of non-perishable goods. Canned food, dried meats, and grains will serve you well. If you're in a rural area, hunting small animals or gathering edible plants may also be a necessary skill. Hygiene is something that often slips through the cracks in times of crisis, but it can be a matter of life or death. Vampires are drawn to blood and strong odors, so keeping yourself clean is vital in avoiding detection. Do not bathe in areas frequented by vampires, as the scent of blood or sweat will attract them. If you've been injured, make sure to clean and treat your wounds to prevent infection, which can weaken your ability to defend yourself. While it may seem impossible to organize when faced with such a deadly enemy, maintaining communication and working as a group is more important than ever. Survivors who work together are much more likely to stay alive. Use radios, signals, or simple codes to communicate with others in your community. Establish meeting points and plans for evacuation. In times of crisis, it is easy for people to panic, but a cohesive group will always have the upper hand over isolated individuals. Create small, self-sufficient groups that can share resources, protect one another, and work together toward mutual survival. A network of survivor groups is a much stronger force than a single person trying to survive alone. Above all, your key to survival is adaptability. The vampire threat is unlike any enemy humanity has faced before. The key to surviving in a world where vampires have evolved is to keep learning, stay flexible, and always anticipate the unexpected. By adapting to the vampire's behavior, utilizing new technologies, and working together as a community, humanity has a fighting chance. Stay vigilant, stay smart, and above all, keep fighting. While it may seem like a warrior's mentality is essential for surviving in the world of vampires, the true survivors often rely more on stealth and avoidance than direct confrontation. Vampires, particularly the more evolved types, are relentless hunters, capable of tracking both visually and through heightened senses. The key to surviving is not to fight them head-on, but to outsmart and outmaneuver them. When moving through potentially dangerous areas, always consider the route with the least exposure. Stick to shadows, avoid brightly lit paths, and use natural features of the landscape for cover. Tall grass, thick forests, or urban alleys can all be your best allies in hiding from vampire patrols. If you're caught in an area where concealment isn't possible, then silence becomes your most valuable asset. Movement should be slow, deliberate, and cautious. Avoid all unnecessary sounds, whether they be from footsteps, equipment, or even heavy breathing. Vampires rely heavily on sound to pinpoint their prey, so any noise you make could signal your location. In areas where vampires are active, some survivors have begun to use disguises to blend into their environment. One effective method involves covering yourself in mud or dirt to mask your scent. Vampires are highly sensitive to the smell of human blood and sweat, and by masking your scent, you reduce the chances of being targeted. Survivors have also fashioned simple cloaks or garb from scavenged materials to blend into their surroundings, whether in forested areas or ruined cityscapes. If possible, create diversions to throw vampires off your trail. Throwing a rock, activating a distant noise source, or setting off traps in another direction can momentarily disorient vampires, giving you a crucial window of time to move away without being noticed. As most of us are all too aware, nightfall is when the vampire menace is at its deadliest. It's during the night that these creatures become more active, hunting with primal instincts and sharpened senses. However, there are some strategies you can employ to mitigate the dangers of the night. First, establish a rotating night watch. If you're part of a community or group, ensure that someone is always awake, alert, and vigilant at night. The majority of vampire attacks occur when people drop their guard, especially during sleep. A single person standing watch, or rotating shifts among a group, is one of the most effective ways to prevent surprise attacks. Use noise as a means of signaling potential danger. In an environment where every sound could mean a vampire is closing in, having a set method for signaling an alert is crucial. Whistles, bells, or even a simple knock can be an effective communication method among survivors when it's too dark for visual cues. These should be easy to make and instantly recognizable to the group, preventing confusion during high-stress moments. When setting up camp for the night, ensure that your shelter is as fortified as possible, especially in areas prone to vampire activity. If possible, create double-layered barricades with quick access to weapons in case of an intrusion. Sleeping during the day and taking shifts at night may also be a wise practice for longer-term survival, as it takes advantage of the vampire's lesser activity during daylight hours. If you're forced to travel at night, use the cover of the darkness to your advantage. Stay low to the ground, remain silent, and avoid leaving any trace of your movement. This will make it much harder for vampires to track you. While vampires have become increasingly dangerous, they are not invincible. As much as they have adapted to their environment, their innate weaknesses can still be exploited. The key is understanding these vulnerabilities and using them against them. Sunlit remains one of the vampire's greatest weaknesses. While some strains of vampires have adapted to withstand limited exposure to sunlight, they are still severely weakened by it. During the early morning or late afternoon, when the sun's rays are most powerful, vampires will be at their most vulnerable. Use this time to explore, gather supplies, or even attempt to eliminate vampire threats if necessary. Silver is proven to be one of the most effective materials in combating vampires. Whether in the form of weapons like knives or bullets, or through traps, silver works effectively to damage or incapacitate most vampire types. The silver burns through the vampire's regenerative abilities, rendering it vulnerable to further attacks. Silver-tipped stakes are especially effective for dispatching vampires that venture into your territory. If you don't have access to silver weaponry, silver coins or jewelry can be improvised as makeshift weapons. Decapitation is another tried-and-true method for neutralizing a vampire. While it's not always practical, a clean cut through the neck will often disable the vampire completely. If you're using a blade, aim for the neck where the head meets the spine. This will sever the vampire's connection to its body, rendering it incapacitated. Be warned, however, that this can be a difficult task with fast-moving vampires. Practice precision and timing. Fire remains a fearsome tool against vampires. Fire doesn't just kill them, it eradicates them entirely. When using fire against vampires, it's essential to aim for their faces, as the heat can cause irreversible damage to their sensory organs. Fire, whether in the form of torches, Molotov cocktails, or even controlled bonfires, can serve as a significant deterrent, and in some cases it can even be used to drive vampires away temporarily. Uncontamination. One particularly troubling trait of the vampire plague is that it spreads through blood. However, some survivors have discovered that certain herbs, potions, or chemicals can hinder the vampire's ability to regenerate. Though these methods are not foolproof, some survivors have been able to manufacture chemical solutions that can limit a vampire's healing factor. Use caution when experimenting with these methods, as they can be dangerous and difficult to craft without proper knowledge. Sound. While vampires rely heavily on sight and scent, they also seem to have a form of heightened hearing. Loud, disorienting sounds can throw off their tracking abilities. Use radios, alarms, or loudspeakers to create confusion in areas that you want to clear of vampires. Be careful not to attract too much attention with these devices, but if used strategically, sound can be a vital tool in disrupting vampire activity. In a world overrun by vampires, information is one of the most precious commodities you can have. Knowledge not only keeps you alive, but allows you to make the most informed decisions. The vampires are learning, evolving, and adapting, but you must do the same. Find reliable sources of information, survivor groups, underground networks, and even old communication systems. Use radios to listen for broadcasts from other survivors, both to stay updated on the vampire threat and to locate potential safe zones. Keep track of what others have learned, especially those who have encountered vampire nests or new forms of vampires. The more you know, the better equipped you will be to anticipate the next move in this evolving battle. If you are lucky enough to encounter or join a group of survivors with scientific or medical knowledge, take the time to learn from them. Knowledge about the vampire virus, its mutations, and potential cures may be your key to survival. In a world ravaged by vampires, it's not just the physical dangers you must contend with. It's the psychological strain of surviving day after day. The constant fear, the isolation, the loss of loved ones. It all takes its toll. The more you understand how the mind reacts to such extreme circumstances, the better prepared you'll be to protect your mental health. Routine becomes your anchor. In a world where everything is unpredictable, the comfort of knowing what to expect next is invaluable. Create simple routines, whether it's waking up at the same time every day, checking your supplies at set intervals, or taking a few moments for self-care. Establishing small, manageable goals can also keep you from feeling overwhelmed. Don't think about surviving for months. Think about surviving the next 24 hours, and then the next. Human connection is crucial. Though it may be difficult to trust others in the post-outbreak world, finding someone to confide in, whether a fellow survivor or even a fellow traveler, can make all the difference. Loneliness is one of the most destructive forces in such an environment. Whenever possible, form bonds, even if they are fleeting. A friendly conversation, a shared meal, or a joint task can provide the briefest moments of comfort and remind you of the humanity you're fighting to preserve. However, it's also essential to set boundaries. While human connection is critical, you must also protect your emotional and psychological well-being. Overexposure to traumatic events can cause severe distress and potentially lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. Take breaks when you can. If you can afford moments of solitude, use them to recharge mentally. Read books, write, or engage in simple hobbies to maintain your identity beyond survival. If you are part of a group, consider setting up a mental health support system. Just as you would divide the responsibility of physical security, you can designate members to keep an eye out for signs of psychological distress. It's important to recognize the early signs of mental collapse, which may include constant paranoia, withdrawal, mood swings, or reckless behavior. If you spot these signs in others, intervene before it leads to violence or despair. Consider meditative techniques. Breathing exercises, mindfulness practices, and mental grounding exercises can help you stay calm and focused. Simple practices like taking 5 deep breaths before a difficult decision or focusing on a visual point in moments of stress can help you regain control of your emotions. Even if it feels trivial, these moments of mindfulness can be the difference between a panicked reaction and a clear, logical decision. Lastly, consider the importance of remembrance. It's easy to become disconnected from the world you once knew. You may feel the weight of the losses you've suffered, friends, family, a life you can never return to. However, keeping memories alive, whether by telling stories, maintaining mementos, or creating traditions, can provide emotional support. Holding on to the past, without allowing it to completely overwhelm you, is vital for maintaining your humanity in a world dominated by fear. A survivor is always ready for the worst. In the fight for survival against vampires, being overly confident in your current situation can be dangerous. Things can go wrong at any time, so preparation is paramount. Establish a second escape route for every location you visit. Whether you're staying in a fortified building or hiding in a temporary shelter, always have a backup plan in case your first choice of escape is blocked by vampires. You may need to make a quick exit at a moment's notice, and having multiple routes of escape will ensure you're not trapped when the worst happens. Always have a bug-out bag ready to go. This bag should contain essentials such as food, water, medical supplies, weapons, and clothing items that can sustain you for at least 72 hours. You should be able to carry this bag without difficulty, as it may be all you have if you need to abandon your current position. Make sure to check your supplies regularly, especially perishable items. If you're in a group, ensure that everyone is familiar with the evacuation plan. Everyone should know where to go, how to get there, and what to do if an evacuation order is given. Keep the group organized and ensure that there are designated leaders for different tasks. Food gathering, defense, medical care. This division of labor ensures that every member has a role to play and that decisions can be made swiftly if things take a turn for the worse. Additionally, stockpile extra supplies. While scavenging can help, there are often periods when it may be difficult or dangerous to go out for resources. When you have the chance, gather more than you need. Store non-perishable food, extra clothing, and medical supplies in hidden caches to ensure that you have the resources to survive in the long term. In the early days of the outbreak, much of the world's technology became obsolete or was destroyed, but there are still remnants of the old world that can be salvaged and used to your advantage. Radios are still one of the most vital tools for communication, especially if the internet is no longer functional. Shortwave radios, in particular, can provide access to distant survivor broadcasts, military transmissions, or even emergency broadcasts that contain vital information. Always keep a spare set of batteries and a backup radio in your emergency kit. If you have access to any form of electricity, such as from solar panels, wind turbines, or even scavenged generators, use it wisely. While it's tempting to power everything you can, conserve energy and keep a minimal power profile. Bright lights or loudspeakers can attract the attention of vampires, so use power in moderation, only when absolutely necessary. Drones and other unmanned vehicles, if you have access to them, can be a great tool for reconnaissance. Use them to scout areas ahead of time, mapping out vampire activity or checking for survivors. Drones can be programmed to fly on autopilot, reducing the need for risky human exposure. However, be cautious not to use them too frequently, as vampire intelligence has adapted to detect flying machines. If you're lucky enough to find working computers or satellite phones, use them to gather intelligence. There may still be survivors operating from hidden locations, and the more information you can gather, the better. Watch for any data that could help you locate resources, safe zones, or possible vampire weaknesses. However, remember that relying too heavily on technology can also be dangerous. Batteries will eventually run out, systems will degrade, and the noise from your devices may make you a target. Always have a backup plan if your technology fails, and be prepared to survive without it. In a world consumed by darkness and danger, it is easy to lose sight of the humanity that remains. But even in the midst of an apocalyptic vampire outbreak, stories of resilience and survival emerge. These tales remind us that, despite the overwhelming odds, hope and the will to live persist. It was a small, makeshift community nestled among the ruins of an old city. Once a thriving neighborhood, now it was just a shell of its former self, dilapidated buildings overgrown with weeds, the silence broken only by distant vampire screeches and the occasional howl of a wild dog. But within that crumbling world, a family of 4 fought to keep their humanity intact. The father, John, had lost his wife in the first wave of the outbreak, but he was determined to protect his children, Emma and Noah. They had found a sanctuary in the basement of an abandoned building. No windows, no way for vampires to climb in. It was perfect. Each day, John would go out into the wasteland to scavenge. He'd risk his life to find food, water, and anything that might help them survive a little longer. Despite the constant threat of vampires lurking nearby, he never lost hope. He returned each night with stories of the outside world, stories of survivors who were fighting, of small communities holding on, and of places where people were rebuilding. End quote. One day, John returned with a new, unexpected find, an old book of stories from before the outbreak. He read it aloud to Emma and Noah, creating a sense of normalcy in their world. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were living. Each evening became an escape, a journey into a world that still had hope, despite the terror surrounding them. For John, these moments of shared joy reminded him that there was still a reason to keep fighting. His children gave him strength, and the love they shared reminded him of the family he had lost. The story of John and his children became a beacon for other survivors. As word spread of their resilience, more people made their way to the ruins, hoping to find safety and a sense of purpose. John had not just kept his family alive. He had created a community, a testament to the strength of the human spirit, even in the darkest of times. Not all stories of survival are communal. Some are the stories of individuals, lone figures who, against all odds, find the courage to move forward. Like Sarah, a former nurse who had lost everything, her small clinic, once a sanctuary for the sick and the vulnerable, had become a tomb. Her family was gone. Her friends were gone. She had walked through the fire and emerged alone, battered and broken. But Sarah had something that many others did not, an unshakable resolve to help others, even if there was no one left to help her. She had been taking shelter in a church that had been untouched by the vampire plague, its high stone walls offering some measure of protection. Every day, Sarah would go out into the ruins, looking for survivors, offering medical care when she could, and searching for supply. The weight of the loss was heavy, but she carried it like a shield, using her grief to fuel her determination. One day, she came across a wounded survivor, an elderly man who had been bitten but had managed to escape the vampires. He was weak, delirious, and on the brink of death. Sarah didn't hesitate. She took him in, treating his wounds and keeping him alive long enough to talk. As he recovered, he shared his story. He had been a teacher, and his greatest regret was not having been able to protect his family. His grief mirrored Sarah's own. And for the first time since the outbreak, Sarah realized she was not alone. She had someone to share her pain with. As the weeks passed, Sarah and the old man whose name was Victor became a team. They built a small safe haven for other survivors, offering medical aid, food, and a semblance of stability in a world turned upside down. Sarah's clinic was no longer just a place for healing physical wounds. It had become a symbol of hope. She was no longer just a survivor. She had become a healer, offering the one thing that everyone needed, a chance at a new life. Through her actions, Sarah reminded the world that even in the face of overwhelming despair, there is always a glimmer of hope. A single person can make a difference, and by continuing to act with compassion and selflessness, the human spirit endures. In another corner of the world, far removed from Sarah's and John's stories, a group of survivors formed a resistance movement. It began as a whisper, a handful of people who were tired of hiding in the shadows, tired of running from the vampires that had decimated their lives. These survivors had lost loved ones, homes, and a sense of normalcy, but they were not ready to give up the fight. The leader of this group, Marcus, had once been a soldier, trained in the ways of war, but when the outbreak struck, he found himself leading not soldiers, but ordinary people. Farmers, teachers, parents, and children. Together, they formed an underground movement, fighting not only against the vampires, but also against the despair that threatened to overtake them. They organized raids, targeting vampire nests and strategic locations that provided resources. They set up safe zones, creating sanctuaries where survivors could rest, heal, and regroup. But their most significant achievement was the creation of a beacon, a signal sent out to survivors scattered across the world. The beacon was simple, a message of hope, telling others that they were not alone. Marcus's movement became the heartbeat of a new resistance, and over time it spread, reaching survivors in distant parts of the world. They weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting for the chance to rebuild, to one day restore humanity. Though the vampire threat was still ever present, the resistance had become a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even in the darkest times, people could come together to make a difference. Amidst the horror, there were those who managed to find innocence in the most unlikely of places, the children. It is said that children have an innate ability to find joy, even when faced with unimaginable challenges. Perhaps this is why, despite the world's collapse, children like Lucas and Maria continued to smile, to laugh, and to play. The children in these dark times became symbols of what humanity had lost, and what it could still gain. They were not just innocent victims, they were the future. And wherever there were children, there was hope. In one of the safe zones, a group of survivors had set up a makeshift school. They didn't have books or teachers, but they had each other. Lucas, a young boy who had lost both his parents to the vampires, was determined to help the others. He took it upon himself to teach the younger children what he had learned from his parents, how to read, how to count, how to survive. Maria, a girl with a passion for art, began creating drawings that reflected the world around her. Her sketches were not just of the monsters lurking in the shadows, but of the people fighting to survive, the beauty of the ruined world, and the bond between survivors. Their efforts reminded those around them that even in the most dire circumstances, human connection and creativity could flourish. The children were not just surviving, they were shaping a new world, one where hope could still bloom. The fight for survival is constant. As humanity clings to the edge of extinction, every moment counts. It's crucial to remain vigilant both for your own safety and for the safety of those around you. This section brings you vital alerts from various regions, as well as critical warnings about immediate threats and dangers. Time is of the essence. We've just received reports from survivors in Sector 12, an area once bustling with life, now reduced to ruin. A large vampire swarm numbering in the dozens has been sighted, closing in on what's left of a nearby safe zone. These creatures are highly organized, exhibiting behavior that suggests they've adapted in ways previously thought impossible. Survivors in this sector are urged to evacuate immediately and head towards the nearest resistance outpost. The swarm is expected to move rapidly, following the scent of human blood. If you are within the vicinity of Sector 12, do not attempt to fight them. This is not a battle you can win with sheer force. Instead, rely on stealth and move quickly and quietly to the nearest extraction point. Remember, vampires are drawn to sound and movement. Silence your radios, avoid any loud actions, and stay hidden. If you are cornered, use the sunlight as a weapon. They are vulnerable to it if the skies are clear. Wait for the first rays of dawn to strike. We have disturbing news from underground research facilities, where survivors have been seeking refuge. A new variant of the vampire virus has been detected in the lower levels of these bunkers. Unlike the standard vampire, these mutated creatures have developed enhanced agility and a unique, terrifying form of echolocation. It is no longer just sight and scent that guides them. It's sound. Reports indicate that survivors in these underground areas are being stalked by creatures that seem to hear even the slightest movement, even the faintest whisper. We advise all survivors in subterranean levels to leave immediately. If that is not possible, do not move unless absolutely necessary. If you must, move at a crawl and avoid making any noise that might alert the mutated vampires to your presence. If you're in an underground zone and unable to escape, create makeshift barriers. Stack anything you can find to block entry points. Use metal, wood, or debris, and reinforce doors or windows. Remember, these creatures can sense sound, but they can't see through walls or barriers. In some regions, the threat is no longer just the vampires. Human groups driven to desperation and madness have begun attacking survivors. These rogue groups, known for their ruthlessness and aggression, have been raiding safe zones for supplies and shelter. They will not hesitate to kill for what they need. Reports from several survivor communities indicate an uptick in these human threats. These groups often travel in large numbers and use intimidation tactics to overpower smaller communities. If you encounter these hostile groups, do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Avoid confrontation at all costs and retreat to safer zones. If you are part of a larger group or community, consider setting up fortified defenses. It's important to stay vigilant and make sure everyone knows the emergency protocols in case of an attack. Keep weapons ready, but don't make yourself a target. Should you be caught in an attack, escape as quickly as possible. Never wait for them to show mercy. A blood moon is expected to rise in the next few days. Historically, these phenomena have coincided with heightened vampire activity. The last blood moon triggered an unprecedented surge in vampire attacks, and there's no reason to believe this will be any different. During the blood moon, vampires become more aggressive, their senses sharper, and their hunger for human blood becomes almost uncontrollable. This period is expected to be particularly dangerous, with massive vampire groups hunting in the open during the night. Survivors are urged to prepare for an even more dangerous period of time. Stockpile food, medical supplies, and weapons as quickly as possible. Ensure that your shelters are fortified and that all escape routes are clear. If you're part of a community or resistance group, discuss emergency procedures now before the blood moon rises. During the blood moon, remain indoors after dusk. Avoid all contact with vampires, and if you must travel, do so only during the daytime and in groups. The vampires are far less active in the daylight, though they may still pose a threat if they are hungry enough, or if there's a cloud cover. In response to the growing threat, several resistance groups have managed to obtain weaponry capable of dealing with the vampires. However, these weapons remain in short supply. Below is an updated list of available resources. UD guns. These firearms emit ultraviolet light, which is highly effective in harming vampires. However, the supply is limited and they require frequent recharging. If you come across one, prioritize its use for defense rather than offense. Silver stakes. Vampires are vulnerable to silver, which can pierce their hearts and destroy them. The Resistance has been distributing silver stakes to key locations, but they are in short supply. If you find one, consider it a rare treasure. Molotov cocktails. While not guaranteed to kill vampires outright, fire is a powerful deterrent. Molotov cocktails remain one of the most effective weapons against large groups. Keep them in reserve for emergency use only. Traditional firearms. While not as effective as specialized weapons, firearms still serve as a last line of defense. Aim for the head or the heart. These are the most vulnerable areas. If you find any of these weapons, do not hesitate to use them. You may not get another chance. Protect yourself and your loved ones. And remember, every weapon you have could be the difference between life and death. We've received reports of a new form of vampire transmission. While the majority of bites result in the transformation of the victim into a vampire, there is now evidence that the virus can be transmitted through blood splatter. Even the smallest amount of vampire blood entering your system could result in infection. Survivors are urged to take extreme precautions when dealing with vampire bodies. Wear gloves, masks, and protective gear when handling any infected remains. If you are wounded in any way during combat, immediately disinfect the wound with available antiseptics and cover it. The sooner you can treat the injury, the lower the risk of infection. If you or someone you know begins to show signs of infection, including fever, confusion, and excessive thirst, immediately isolate them from others. If possible, administer antiviral agents, though supplies are scarce. This will slow the progression of the infection, but it is not a cure. If you do become infected, the priority should be to isolate yourself before the transformation is complete. Survivors may need to make the tough decision of euthanizing infected individuals to prevent the spread of the virus. As the vampire outbreak spreads, it's crucial to know where safe zones are located and how to get there. These places provide a temporary refuge for survivors, though they are not invincible. The world is a dangerous place, and safety is a fragile thing. These coordinates will lead you to the last remaining strongholds where you can regroup, recover, and plan your next move. If you're listening to this broadcast, you're probably already on the move, trying to find your way to safety. Here's the most up-to-date list of safe zones, along with tips on how to reach them. Remember, these locations are often targeted by both vampires and hostile human groups, so proceed with caution. Haven Base, located in Sector 5, is one of the largest resistance outposts left in the central region. It is surrounded by fortified walls, and its location is strategically placed near underground tunnels that offer an escape route in case of a breach. The area is patrolled regularly by armed survivors and is a vital lifeline for those trapped in the surrounding cities. To reach Haven Base, head towards the hills just outside the city. If you're traveling by vehicle, take the old highway route, which has been cleared of obstacles. Be sure to approach at nightfall, when the gates are least likely to be overwhelmed. If you must move during the day, stay hidden until the evening hours. Use nearby forest for cover, as vampires are known to be less active in shaded areas during the day. The resistance at Haven Base has limited food and medical supplies. While it remains one of the best guarded zones, the influx of refugees has strained its resources. It is advised to bring as much food and water as possible when heading there. Expect long waits as they process incoming survivors. Located deep in the northern mountain ranges, New Dawn Refuge is one of the most secure sanctuaries remaining. It's surrounded by treacherous terrain that vampires have yet to fully navigate, giving it a natural defense against the undead. The refugees here have learned to adapt to the cold climate and use it to their advantage. If you are traveling from the southern regions, the best route is to head through the narrow passes that cut through the mountains. Avoid the main highways, as they are now infested with vampire packs. Once you approach the foothills, you must navigate by foot to avoid detection. The last few miles are particularly dangerous, so ensure you have warm clothing and supplies before attempting the trek. While New Dawn Refuge is relatively isolated, it is also one of the most stable places left. The people there are skilled in living off the land, making them largely self-sufficient. However, they are not immune to vampire attacks. If you are not familiar with the terrain, consider traveling in groups or with someone who knows the area. The Hollow Fort is a former military installation that has been repurposed as a safe haven for survivors. Situated near the coast, this facility offers a combination of defense and resource access. It is equipped with high walls, armed towers, and even old weapons caches from before the outbreak. Despite its defensive capabilities, the Hollow Fort has been under constant siege from vampire hordes, so it's important to be cautious. To reach the Hollow Fort, follow the coastline south from the main city until you hit the old military base. The best time to arrive is during the early morning hours, when vampire activity is lower. Be mindful of any sounds as you approach. These creatures are quick to respond to noise. This zone is in high demand. If you are heading to the Hollow Fort, be prepared to wait at least several days outside the perimeter before you are let in. The local militia has become increasingly selective about who can enter, as the fort is currently overcrowded. Safe Haven Oasis is a unique desert-based sanctuary located in the harsh, arid southwest. What makes this outpost special is its ability to utilize natural resources, especially water, while being camouflaged among the rocky terrain. The survivors here have learned how to navigate the harsh desert climate and use it to protect themselves from the vampire hordes. The desert is unforgiving. If you're heading to Safe Haven Oasis, you must be prepared for extreme heat. Water is scarce, so be sure to pack extra supplies. Travel at night is advised to avoid the intense daytime sun, which can leave you vulnerable to dehydration. Follow the old dirt road leading to the oasis, but be aware of sandstorms and potential vampire ambushes. While Safe Haven Oasis offers some of the best chances for survival, the journey there is difficult. Those who have made it often report that the terrain is littered with vampire nests, so you must remain cautious. Approach quietly and, if possible, signal the outpost's lookouts to ensure you're not mistaken for a threat. Arcadia Falls is one of the last underground bunkers still in operation. Initially a top-secret military installation, it has become a hidden sanctuary for survivors. The facility is a self-sustained environment with enough provisions to last for several months. It's located deep beneath the ground, making it a prime location to avoid vampire attacks. To reach Arcadia Falls, you'll need to locate the hidden entrance, which is not marked on any map. The bunker entrance is located beneath an old factory complex, so look for signs of activity or signs that the area is still occupied. The journey can be long, as the underground routes are often blocked. Bring shovels or tools to dig your way through if necessary. Arcadia Falls has been one of the safest zones so far, but it's under constant threat from the vampire horde, who have begun to burrow into the earth in search of survivors. Be cautious when entering or exiting the facility. There are also rumors that some of the survivors inside may be infected, so keep your distance until you've been thoroughly screened. These are just a few of the remaining resistance locations. Be sure to stay alert and know that your journey to safety will require more than just physical strength. The mental toll of this fight is heavy, but every step you take brings you closer to a future where humans can once again thrive. Keep moving, stay vigilant, and trust in the humanity that's left. As we near the end of this broadcast, I want to leave you with a message of resilience. Resilience that has been the backbone of human survival since the very beginning. Through all the devastation, the darkness, and the ever-looming threat of the vampires, it's this spirit of fighting on that keeps us connected to one another. I know these times are trying. They are hard beyond what any of us could have imagined. In the blink of an eye, everything we took for granted was ripped away. But even now, when the world seems to be on the edge of collapse, there are still those who fight, still those who hold on to what it means to be human. Every survivor you meet, every group you encounter, every person who chooses to stand up in the face of these monsters is a testament to the strength that lives within us. That's something vampires can never take away from us. It is in our blood, it is in our bones, and it is in our will to survive. As we close this transmission, remember, you are not alone. The struggle is far from over, but there are safe zones, there are survivors, and there is hope. Do not let the fear of the night take away your belief in the morning. Stay connected to those you love. Stay connected to your humanity. But, above all, stay alive. This is the end of Transmission. Keep your heart strong, and never forget we are the last hope for humanity. This is Dr. George Burns signing off.